So, mood therapy, huh? You've been digging into that lately.
Yeah, I've been spending some time with it.
It's fascinating stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, really is.
I gave it a shot a while back,
Oh,
actually,
really?
when I was going through a bit of a rough patch. And I was blown away by how much my thoughts were, like, really messing with my mood.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to be doing a deep dive into David Byrne's Feeling Good, the new mood therapy today.
Okay.
It's a classic for a reason,
Yeah,
just packed with helpful tools and techniques.
absolutely. It's a great book.
So what I find really interesting about Burns' approach is he doesn't just tell you to think positive thoughts.
Right.
He actually gives you this framework for understanding like
Yeah.
why we get stuck in these negative thinking patterns and what
Mhm.
we can actually do about it.
Totally. And what I find fascinating is that he provides a real structure, a real framework for understanding why we get stuck in these thought patterns
hmm
and then what we can do about it.
Okay, so tell me more about that framework. What were some of the key takeaways for you?
Well, I think one of the most important things is the idea of cognitive distortions,
Okay.
which are like mental traps that lead us down this path of negative thinking.
Okay.
And Burns outlines 10 common distortions.
Okay.
And he argues that these distortions are often at the root of our emotional distress.
Okay, cognitive distortions. That sounds kind of intimidating.
Sure.
Can you break that down for me a little bit?
Of course.
Like, what are these mental traps? What do they look like?
Imagine you're at a party and you see someone you know across the room and they don't acknowledge you.
Okay.
What's your immediate thought?
Probably something like, oh, they must be ignoring me. Did I
Exactly.
do something wrong?
Yeah, and that's a classic example of a cognitive distortion called jumping to conclusions.
Okay.
You're taking a single piece of evidence
Yeah.
and creating this whole narrative around it without actually knowing the full story.
Oh, wow.
Right.
I see it now.
Yeah,
So instead of considering other possibilities, like maybe they just didn't see me,
right.
I immediately jumped to like the worst case scenario and started feeling bad about myself.
Precisely. And that's how these distortions work.
Mm,
They take a small event and blow it out of proportion,
right.
leading to this whole cascade of negative emotions.
So jumping to conclusions is one of them. What are some of the other distortions that Burns talks about?
Another really common one is all or nothing thinking. This is the tendency to see things in black and white
Mhm.
with no shades of gray.
Right.
For example, if you make a mistake at work, you might think, I'm a complete failure. I can't do anything right.
Ugh, yeah, the I'm a total failure trap.
Right.
I think we've all been there.
Absolutely.
We've all
Yeah.
fallen into that one.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize that these thoughts are rarely accurate reflections of reality,
Mm.
right? One mistake doesn't mean you're a complete failure.
Just like one bad date doesn't mean you're destined to be alone forever.
Okay, so we've got jumping to conclusions. We've got all or nothing thinking.
Uh-huh.
Are there any others that we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, one that often trips people up is mental filtering.
Okay.
It's the tendency to focus on the negative aspects of a situation while ignoring all the positive ones.
Oh, so it's kind of like wearing those rose-colored glasses, but in reverse.
Yeah.
Just seeing the bad stuff.
Exactly. You're only seeing the bad stuff, and everything looks gloomy.
Okay, so give me an example of that.
Imagine you get feedback on a project at work.
Okay.
Your boss praises your creativity, your problem-solving skills,
Uh-huh.
but they also mention one area where you could improve.
Okay.
Now, if you're using the mental filter, you'll likely obsess over that one criticism
Yeah.
and completely dismiss all the positive feedback.
Ouch. That's tough.
Right.
It's like you're deliberately choosing to ignore the good stuff
Yeah.
and just wallow in the negative.
And what's really interesting is that we often do this unconsciously. We're not even aware that we're filtering out the positive
Right.
and magnifying the negative.
So how do we start to break free from these distorted thinking patterns?
Right.
It seems like it would be hard to change something that you're not even aware of doing.
That's where Burns' techniques come in.
Okay.
He provides a set of practical tools
Okay.
to help you identify, challenge, and reframe these negative thoughts.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these tools.
All right.
What are some of the techniques that Burns recommends?
One of the most powerful and widely used techniques is the triple column technique, which is essentially a thought journal on steroids.
Okay.
It helps you break down your negative thoughts
Okay.
and create more balanced perspectives.
Okay, the triple column technique.
Uh-huh.
I'm ready to take notes. Break it down for me. How does it work?
So it's pretty simple, actually. You literally draw 3 columns on a piece of paper.
Okay.
In the first column, you write down your negative thought.
Okay.
In the second column, you identify the cognitive distortion that's at play,
Uh-huh.
whether it's jumping to conclusions, all or nothing thinking, mental filtering, or one of the other distortions that Burns outlines.
Right.
And then in the third column, you come up with a more balanced, realistic thought.
So let's go back to our party example from earlier.
Sure.
I see someone across the room, they don't wave, and I immediately think, oh, they must be ignoring me.
Okay.
How would I use the triple column technique to challenge that thought?
So in the first column, you'd write down that automatic thought, they're ignoring me.
Okay.
In the second column, you'd identify the distortion, which in this case is jumping to conclusions.
Right.
And then in the third column, you'd come up with a more balanced thought. It might be something like, maybe they didn't see me.
Okay.
Or even if they did see me and didn't wave, it doesn't necessarily mean they're ignoring me. They could be distracted or having a bad day.
Wow. I see how that works.
Right.
Just the act of writing it down and analyzing the thought, it seems like it would create some distance from that initial, like, knee-jerk reaction.
Exactly. It helps you take a step back and observe your thoughts rather than just getting swept away by them. And by identifying the distortion, you start to recognize those patterns
Right.
and develop strategies for challenging them.
So it's like you're becoming more aware of your own thought processes
Yeah.
and gaining more control over how you react to situations.
Exactly. And the more you practice this technique, the more automatic it becomes.
Okay.
You start to catch yourself in those disordered thinking patterns and consciously choose to reframe them.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be really helpful, but how does this all tie back to our mood?
Right.
How does changing our thoughts actually lead to changes in how we feel?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to one of the core principles of mood therapy, which is the thought-feeling connection.
Okay, the thought-feeling connection. Tell me more about that.
So, Burns argues that it's not the events themselves that cause our feelings,
Right.
but our thoughts about the events.
Mm.
In other words, it's not what happens to us, but how we interpret it that determines how we feel.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So let's say I get rejected for a job,
Okay.
and my thought is, I'm a total failure. I'll never find a job.
Yeah.
I'm likely to feel devastated and hopeless.
Exactly. But if your thought is, okay, this wasn't the right fit,
Right.
but it's a learning experience, on to the next opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
you're more likely to feel disappointed,
Okay.
but also motivated to keep searching.
So same event, job rejection, but completely different thoughts, and therefore completely different feelings.
Yes.
It's like the event itself is neutral,
Yes.
and it's our thoughts that add the emotional charge.
Exactly. And that's why cognitive distortions are so problematic.
Mm.
They lead us to interpret events in ways that are often inaccurate and overly negative,
Right.
which then triggers this whole cascade of unpleasant emotions.
This is making so much sense. It's like we have more power over our feelings than we realize.
Yes.
We can actually choose to interpret events in ways that are more helpful
Exactly.
and supportive of our emotional well-being.
Exactly. And that's one of the most empowering aspects of mood therapy.
Hmm.
It's not about denying our feelings
Mm.
or pretending that everything is perfect,
Right.
but it's about recognizing the power of our thoughts
Hmm.
and utilizing these tools to create a more positive and balanced internal experience.
So insightful. I already feel like I have a better understanding of how my own thoughts influence my emotions.
That's great.
But before we go any further, let's recap what we've learned so far.
Okay.
What are some of the key takeaways that our listeners should be thinking about?
Well, first and foremost, we've discovered that our thoughts play a crucial role in shaping our feelings,
Right.
and that we often get caught in these cognitive distortions, these mental traps that lead to all these negative emotions.
Yeah.
And Burns outlines 10 common distortions, including jumping to conclusions, all or nothing thinking, and mental filtering.
Yeah.
And to combat these negative thought patterns, he recommends the triple column technique,
Right.
which is a powerful tool for identifying, challenging, and reframing those distorted thoughts.
It's a great summary. I'm starting to see how these concepts all fit together, but I've got to ask,
Yeah?
are we really just at the mercy of our thoughts?
Mm,
Do we have to just passively accept whatever pops into our heads?
that's a great question.
Or can we actually learn to control our thinking?
That's a fantastic question. And it leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of mood therapy, the idea that we can actually train our minds to think differently.
Okay, now that sounds like something I need to know more about.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds great. So are we ready to explore how we can actually train our minds to think differently?
Absolutely.
All right.
The idea that we can actually change our thinking patterns, it just feels so empowering.
If-
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Okay.
And we've already started that process
Right.
by exploring these cognitive distortions.
Okay.
So now it's about becoming more mindful of when those distortions are popping up in our daily lives.
Okay, so it's like we've got our like cognitive distortion detectors turned on,
Exactly.
scanning our thoughts for these like sneaky patterns.
Sure.
So what happens when our detectors go off?
Right.
What do we do then?
That's where the real work begins.
Okay.
So Burns provides a variety of techniques for challenging and reframing those distorted thoughts.
Okay.
We've already talked about a triple column technique,
Right.
which is a great starting point.
Right, where you write down the thought, identify the distortion,
Yeah.
and then come up with a more balanced perspective.
Exactly. And once you've identified that distortion,
Yeah.
you can start to ask yourself some key questions.
Yeah.
For example, if you're struggling with all or nothing thinking, you might ask yourself, is it really true that I'm a complete failure?
Hmm.
Are there any examples of times when I've succeeded?
So it's like you're gathering evidence to counter those negative thoughts.
Yeah.
You're putting those distortions on trial
Yeah. I love
and forcing them to defend their case.
And often when we really examine those negative thoughts, they crumble under scrutiny.
Right. But I imagine it takes a lot of practice to get to that point.
Absolutely.
Our brains are probably pretty attached to those familiar thought patterns,
Of course.
even if they're not serving us well.
Totally. It's like creating a new path in a forest. At first, it's really hard to break through the underbrush.
Right.
But the more you walk that path, the easier it becomes.
Hmm.
And eventually, that becomes the natural route your brain takes.
Okay, so practice is key.
Yeah.
But what about those times when those negative thoughts just feel so overwhelming
Yeah.
and intense that it's hard to even think straight?
Right.
What do we do in those moments?
I think that's where the thought-feeling connection becomes really important to remember.
Okay.
Remember, our feelings are often fueled by those distorted thoughts.
Right.
So if we can shift our thinking, we can also shift our emotional state.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions or pretending we're not feeling them.
Right.
It's about addressing the thoughts that are at the root of those feelings.
Exactly. And Burns provides this technique called cognitive restructuring,
Okay.
which is essentially a more in-depth process of challenging and reframing those negative thoughts.
Okay.
It involves identifying the underlying beliefs that are driving those thoughts and then actively working to change those beliefs.
Wow. Cognitive restructuring.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty intense. Can you give me an example of how that might work in practice?
Sure, let's say someone has a fear of public speaking.
Okay.
Through cognitive restructuring, they might uncover a core belief that they're not good enough or that they'll be judged harshly by others.
Right.
So they can then start to challenge that belief by gathering evidence to the contrary.
Okay.
They might remind themselves of times when they've spoken confidently in front of others, or they might seek out positive feedback from people they trust.
So it's like they're building a new, more positive belief system to replace that old limiting one.
Exactly, and as they start to internalize this new belief, their fear of public speaking will likely diminish.
It really highlights how much power we have to like shape our own internal world.
It does.
And it's not just about changing our thinking, right?
Right.
Burns emphasizes that action plays a crucial role in mood therapy as well.
He does. He calls this behavioral activation.
Okay, behavioral activation. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more about that.
So it's essentially the idea that taking action, even when you don't feel like it, can actually help to improve your mood.
Okay.
It's like breaking free from that cycle of inactivity and negative thinking that often accompanies depression or anxiety.
So instead of just wallowing in our negative feeling,
Right.
we actually push ourselves to get out there and do things that might make us feel better.
Exactly. And the key is to focus on activities that bring you joy, purpose, or a sense of accomplishment. It could be something as simple as going for a walk, spending time in nature, listening to your favorite music, or connecting with a loved one.
I can see how that would be helpful.
Yeah.
It's like you're creating a positive distraction from those negative thoughts that are swirling around in your head.
And it's more than just a distraction. Engaging in activities can actually trigger the release of endorphins,
Right.
those feel-good chemicals in our brains.
So it's like we're hacking our own brain chemistry
Exactly.
by getting our bodies moving and doing things we enjoy.
Exactly. And the more we engage in these positive activities, the more our brains start to associate those activities with feeling good. It's like creating a positive feedback loop.
Okay, so we've got cognitive techniques like the triple column technique and cognitive restructuring. And we've got behavioral techniques like behavioral activation.
Yeah.
It sounds like a powerful combination.
It is, and Burns emphasizes that both approaches are essential
Mm.
for creating lasting change.
Yeah, okay.
It's not enough to just think differently.
Right.
We also need to act differently.
So it's about aligning our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Yes,
It's about creating a sense of coherence and
Yeah.
consistency in our internal world.
precisely. And when we do that,
Yeah.
we create this foundation for greater emotional well-being and resilience.
This is all so insightful. But I'm curious, is there anything else in feeling good that really jumped out at you?
Yeah.
Any other key concepts or techniques that our listeners might find helpful?
Well, one thing that Burns talks about that I think is really important is this idea of self-compassion.
Hmm.
He argues that a lot of our negative thoughts and feelings stem from a lack of self-kindness.
Oh, self-compassion. That's a big one.
Yeah,
I think we're often our own worst critics.
absolutely. And it's important to remember that we all make mistakes, we all have flaws, and we all experience these difficult emotions from time to time. That's part of being human.
So instead of beating ourselves up for our imperfections,
Right.
we need to learn to treat ourselves with the same kindness and understanding
Exactly.
that we would offer to a good friend.
Exactly. And that involves challenging those negative self-talk patterns and replacing them with more supportive and encouraging messages.
So it's like we're becoming our own best friend,
Yeah.
offering ourselves words of comfort and encouragement when we're struggling.
Exactly. And that can have a profound impact on our mood and overall well-being.
Mm.
When we're able to be kind to ourselves,
Uh-huh.
we're more likely to feel resilient in the face of challenges
Right.
and bounce back from setbacks.
This is all so powerful, but I'm wondering, how do we actually cultivate self-compassion?
Yeah.
It seems like it would be a lot easier to criticize ourselves
Yeah.
than to offer ourselves kindness, especially when we're feeling down.
You're right. It does take practice.
Yeah.
But there are a few key things we can do. One is to just start noticing our self-talk.
Okay.
Pay attention to how you're talking to yourself throughout the day. Are you being harsh,
Yeah.
judgmental, critical,
Right.
or are you being supportive, encouraging, and understanding?
It's like becoming aware of that inner voice
Yeah,
and starting to change the tone of the conversation.
exactly. And once you start to notice those negative self-talk patterns, you can start to challenge them.
Okay.
Ask yourself, would I say this to a friend?
Mm.
If the answer is no,
Yeah.
then why are you saying it to yourself?
It's about holding our own thoughts accountable to
Right.
the same standards of kindness and compassion that we would apply to others.
Precisely. And another important aspect of self-compassion is mindfulness.
Okay.
It's about being present with our experience without judgment. It's about acknowledging our thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them.
So it's about creating a sense of space between ourselves and our emotions
Exactly.
so we can observe them without getting caught up in the drama.
Exactly. And that allows us to respond to our emotions with greater wisdom and clarity.
This is also helpful. It feels like we're really starting to get to the heart of what it means to create a more positive and fulfilling emotional experience.
It is.
But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Sure.
I'm wondering if you could share any tips for how our listeners can actually start incorporating these concepts and techniques into their daily lives.
Sure. I think one of the most important things is to start small.
Okay.
Don't try to overhaul your entire thinking process overnight.
Right.
Just choose one technique that resonates with you and start practicing it consistently.
So it could be something as simple as keeping a thought journal or practicing gratitude for a few minutes each day.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be days when you feel like you're making great progress. And there will be days when you feel like you're back at square one.
Right.
The key is to be patient with yourself and to just keep practicing.
So it's about being kind to ourselves even when we're struggling to change our thinking patterns.
Absolutely. And another helpful tip is to create a supportive environment for yourself.
Okay.
Surround yourself with people who uplift and encourage you, and limit your exposure to negativity,
Right.
whether it's from the news, social media, or toxic relationships.
It's like creating a safe space for yourself
Yeah,
where you can nurture those positive thoughts and feelings.
exactly. And as you start to cultivate more self-compassion
Uh-huh.
and engage in activities that bring you joy,
Yeah.
you'll naturally start to shift your internal world in a more positive direction.
This has been so insightful.
Good.
I'm feeling really inspired to keep exploring these concepts and to see how I can apply them to my own life.
Great.
But I'm curious, as we move into the final part of our deep dive, is there anything in feeling good that surprised you?
Hmm.
Any unexpected insights or aha moments?
Yeah, one thing that really struck me was Burns' emphasis on the power of gratitude.
You mentioned aha moments.
Yeah.
Did any of those techniques resonate with you?
Yeah, one thing that really struck me was Burns' emphasis on the power of gratitude.
Gratitude. I've heard that before.
Sure.
But to be honest, it's always felt kind of fluffy to me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, being thankful is nice,
Right.
but can it really shift your mood that much?
Right. That's kind of where I was too.
Yeah.
Until I really started digging deeper into the research.
Yeah.
So Burns doesn't just say be grateful. He lays out this framework for how gratitude actually works and why it's so effective.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the secret sauce behind gratitude?
Well, what's fascinating is that gratitude isn't just about feeling good. It actually rewires your brain to focus on the positive.
Okay.
When you actively look for things to be thankful for, you're essentially training your mind to notice and appreciate the good things in your life, even amidst the challenges.
So it's not about ignoring the bad stuff,
Right.
but about shifting your attention
Exactly.
to a different frequency, one that's tuned into the positive.
Totally. And the more you practice gratitude,
Yeah.
the more those neural pathways get strengthened.
Okay.
It's like building a muscle. The more you use it,
Yeah.
the stronger it gets.
I like that muscle analogy.
Yeah.
So instead of getting bogged down in these negative thought spirals, gratitude can actually help us build up our positivity muscle.
Exactly.
So we can bounce back more easily.
Totally. And the cool thing is there's tons of simple ways
Right.
to cultivate gratitude in your daily life.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is keeping a gratitude journal.
Okay.
Just take a few minutes each day to jot down a few things you're grateful for.
I've tried that before.
Yeah.
And I always felt this pressure to come up with big, profound things to be grateful for.
I hear you.
It almost felt like a chore.
Right. But the beauty of gratitude is that it can be found in the smallest of things.
Right.
It could be as simple as a warm cup of coffee in the morning, a beautiful sunset,
Yeah.
a kind word from a stranger,
Yeah.
or even just the fact you have a roof over your head.
So it's about finding those little glimmers of joy
Exactly.
in the everyday moments. I
Yeah.
can see how that could make a big difference.
Totally.
Is there anything else that resonated with you from Burns's book?
Yeah, he talks about this concept called hidden should statements.
Okay.
I thought it was brilliant.
Hidden should statements.
It's this idea that a lot of our negative thoughts
Yeah.
come from these unspoken expectations we have for ourselves and others.
Oh, interesting. Can you give me an example?
Sure. So let's say you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed
Okay.
because you have too much on your plate.
Right.
You might start thinking, I should be able to handle all of this,
Yeah.
or I shouldn't feel so stressed.
Hmm.
But those should statements are actually hiding this deeper belief
Okay.
that you need to be perfect or in control all the time.
It's like we're setting ourselves up for failure
Exactly.
with these impossible standards.
Totally. And what's fascinating is that we often aren't even aware of these hidden should statements. They're like these unspoken rules running in the background of our minds,
Right.
dictating how we think and feel.
Okay, so how do we expose those hidden shoulds and break free from their grip?
So Burns suggests this technique
Okay.
called externalization of voices,
Okay.
where you actually write down those should statements as if they were coming from an external source.
So I'm literally giving a voice
Yeah.
to these unspoken expectations.
Exactly.
Oh, what happens then?
So once you've written them down,
Yeah.
you can start to examine them more objectively. You ask yourself, whose voice is this? Where did this belief come from? Is it really true?
It's like you're putting those should statements on the witness stand
I love that.
and cross-examining them
So,
to see if they hold up under scrutiny.
and often when we really look at them,
Yeah.
we realize that these beliefs are outdated, irrational,
Right.
or simply not serving us anymore.
So by bringing those hidden shoulds to the surface,
Yeah,
we can start to challenge them
exactly.
and create a more realistic and compassionate set of expectations for ourselves.
Totally. And as we let go of those rigid should statements,
Yeah.
we find that we feel lighter, freer, more empowered to make choices that are aligned with our values and our needs.
This is so powerful.
It is.
I'm starting to see how feeling good isn't just a self-help book. It's like this guide to understanding how our minds work.
Yeah,
and how we can use that understanding
totally.
to create a more positive and fulfilling experience of life.
And what's really inspiring is that Bruns emphasizes that anyone can learn these techniques. It's not about having some innate ability to be happy or positive.
Right.
It's about developing skills that can be practiced and honed over time.
So it's like learning any new skill. It takes effort and consistency,
Yeah,
but the rewards are worth it.
totally. And the more you practice these techniques,
Yeah.
the more you'll start to see a shift in your
Hmm.
thinking, your feelings, and even your behavior.
Right.
It's like you're gradually rewiring your brain to create this more positive and resilient internal world.
This has been such an incredible journey.
It has.
We've covered so much ground,
Yeah,
from understanding those cognitive distortions
Oh, I know.
to mastering the triple column technique
Yeah.
to embracing gratitude and challenging those hidden should statements.
That's been great.
I feel like I have this whole new toolkit
I hope so.
for managing my mood and navigating those ups and downs of life.
It's a great book. I really encourage everyone to check it out.
I think the most important takeaway for me is that we're not just victims of our thoughts and feelings.
Right.
We actually have the power to choose how we think
Totally.
and how we respond to the world around us.
I think that's a great takeaway.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into feeling good.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure exploring these concepts with you. And to our listeners, I hope you found this conversation as insightful and inspiring as I have.
I hope so too.
Remember, you have the power to create a more positive and fulfilling emotional experience.
Absolutely.
So go out there and start practicing those techniques.
You got it.